call is in for a second alarm fire.
Pump 12 is on scene, the upper senior complex.
Multi-story buildings like this are every firefighter's idea of a tough call. Add in the need to evacuate large numbers of at-risk groups like these seniors, and you have what could be your most demanding incident yet. As you can see here, even the most organized location could become a logistical mess if the fire is serious and you don't have a clear strategy worked out in advance. Canada's aging population and its impact on fire rescue services will grow in the coming years. Fire crews responding to a call at seniors' residences can expect many challenges in order to make sure everyone is safe.
Well, they'd have to be aware that the residents in our centers have varying and complex needs, everything from ventilator dependent to brain injury, dementia, mental health disorders, physical frailty, obesity. Many can't hear or follow verbal instructions. Others are not independently mobile. So evacuating this group of people requires a flexible approach that takes these needs into account. Go into a room, you want to evacuate, we've got to respond based on what we see. Is that person going to help or not? Here at the front with me.
Rescue and evacuation will be among your first tactical priorities and a cornerstone of your incident strategy. To manage the call, command must have a clear understanding of the building, its occupants, and their issues. As command, you must be thinking 5 steps ahead at all times. To start, the pre-incident plan for the building will provide its layout, stairwells, exits, and other features important to firefighting, such as standpipes, sprinklers, and ventilation systems. Edmonton Fire Rescue is committed to conducting PIPs on all seniors' residences. These are being added to the Mobile for Public Safety program so that they're available for command on scene. The plans contain critically important information.
We've been doing pre-incident plans on all these facilities, so we're certainly more aware of how they're constructed and the concerns that we have. Some floors may be a lockdown floor because of cognitive deficits. Sometimes access can be somewhat of a difficulty. Elevators are not generally in use when we get there, so when we have to evacuate and the fragility of some of the patients, sometimes a major crew involves an officer and 2 men. That's what you need to remove 1 patient. So if you've got a facility with hundreds of patients, you can imagine the resources that you need to remove them.
Code red, second Parker, gray zone, room 228.
Most of these buildings vary in age and upkeep. The more incident command knows in advance, the better. Building codes are being revised to accommodate a growing elderly population. This makes building size up even more challenging. Depending on the building's occupancy classification, the building could vary a great deal. It may or may not have sprinklers, or be made of combustible, non-combustible materials, or a combination of the two. Many buildings have seniors with higher needs than indicated because of delays in moving them to facilities that can better cope with what they may now require. Any building may have seniors who are unable to evacuate regardless of its classification.
Of course, our greatest problem right now is people who age in place, and we have people who are in buildings that were never designed for them, and that's a huge critical problem right now. This building compared to a different one, they'll know what's in this building, they know the features, they know the staff, they know everything. One of the other buildings, it might be a big surprise, and all of a sudden they show up, and the people are moving slow, the evacuation's slow, and then we talked about the Swiss cheese effect. Now the building's all full of smoke, it's now become a dangerous situation, and they spend all their time evacuating people instead of fighting the fire. So we call it Swiss cheese. What ends up happening is that many buildings, as they transform or evolve or whatever word you want to use, there's maintenance done on them, there's renovations, and a lot of the features necessarily aren't done perfectly. So if there ever is a fire, it often just starts migrating and spreads very quick, and you end up losing the whole building.
Be ready to encounter all sorts of challenges at this type of incident related to building codes and its residents. Your understanding of incident command at large events will be absolutely necessary. The incident will need to ramp up to accommodate primary and secondary search and rescue, and a lobby control sector to handle elevators, stairwells, and entrances and exits.
I think when I'm pulling up, and from my experience, is not long after I pull up, I'm calling the second alarm. And strictly, I need the personnel, because I know if I need any kind of evacuation, even minor, I run out of personnel, because I've got 2 fire attack crews, I've got recon sectors, I got 2 lobbies set up. I've already depleted my first response apparatuses, so I would put in a second almost right as soon as I pull up. If there's any sign of smoke or fire, a second would go in right away.
Once you've determined the building layout, assign lobby control to work with building staff to designate 1 stairwell for operations and 1 for evacuation. Realize that an evacuation this size is rarely seamless. Many residents may already be in the stairwell designated for operations before you're set up. Use building staff to direct residents to the correct exits and assist those who are already in a stairwell to exit.
When I come to a seniors residence, I'll assign 2 lobbies, which would be 2 major crews. That would be typically at least 6 personnel. And just because I know from experience that there is some confusion, like even when you tell an individual, I want you to go over there, they don't necessarily understand, or maybe that's not quite the direction they want to go. So it takes a lot of personnel just to kind of keep the lobby clear of people moving in and out. So it's certainly a concern.
If required, set up fans in the evacuation stairwells to pressurize them and make them more tenable for evacuees. On scene, you must quickly decide whether you need to evacuate or not, and then put your plan in place. A shelter-in-place strategy may work in a sprinklered building with adequate staffing to assist, but this strategy may not work in non-sprinklered buildings or when staff is in short supply to help, as is so often the case. There's usually even fewer staff at night, so be ready to call in additional resources if required.
Our concern is the fire floor. The next concern is the floor above, the floor below. So we try to evacuate those areas. Again, if it's a larger incident, we may shelter in place, which might be more of a tactical advantage. Because when you start trying to move people, then they move slow and they a little bit confused, so that things do get congested very, very quickly.
Sorry, we're just going to need you to stay in your room for the moment here. We'll come back for you.
Hi. We just need you to stay.
In a situation like this, the incident commander obviously has to act quickly to make sure staff and residents are evacuated safely. A clear evacuation strategy is essential. To assist you in this, there are 3 key tactics to consider. First, think ahead for resources you may need. This is really critical if the entire building requires evacuation, especially if the weather is poor. Remember that processes are in place that make this task as simple as 1 phone call to the duty office.
That timeliness in regards to activating ESRT is so important. One, in the sense that we get on scene as quickly as possible to assist the emergency responders, to take away the displaced persons, which now frees them up in regards to dealing with the core function, as I said earlier, the threat, whether it be police, fire, and or EMS. But when we talk about functional needs and functional need people, the stakeholders that we could call in are anywhere from AHS, Alberta Health Services. We'll already have EMS on scene in regards to that trauma response. And then our connections with disaster services, Red Cross, etc., etc.
Second, when planning your evacuation, compartmentalize the building into areas. Think of the building in triangles. Evacuate the fire room and each adjacent room as your first priority. Then move out from there to evacuate the wing or pod, the floor, the building, and finally to the location where ETS buses can shuttle the evacuees to shelter. Finally, consider the ratio of firefighters and evacuees. know that you're going to have to depend on the building staff to assist. This includes caregivers, administrators, building maintenance staff, security personnel, cleaning staff, and any visitors. Most buildings have trained staff and emergency plans in place. Plan to work with these people to accomplish your objectives.
This way back up to the
Staff should be able to tell your firefighters about equipment that they can use to evacuate residents, such as slides or wheelchairs. Staff should also be able to tell your team about the particular needs of residents. Dementia patients, for example. Extra staff may need to be posted to make sure people with memory loss do not go back into the building. By applying these tactics and having access to building plans and a well-thought-out pre-incident plan, the incident commander should be able to quickly plot an effective evacuation strategy. The right strategy can turn a tough call like this into one that's routine, a well-planned, well-executed, successful incident with no one hurt and the fire extinguished.
Unit 228 is clear.
Command copy.